Hello, welcome back to Dream Analytica. This is going to be part 2 of understanding dreams, analyzing dreams using analytical psychology, or rather Jungian psychology. We're going to take a look at this individual's dream. I'm going to read it to you, and then we're going to try and interpret it. It's a very short dream, but a very powerful one. And this is one of the reasons why I chose this dream, is mainly because of the visual imagery involved and the symbolic associations involved. Before I read to you the dream, I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into the context of this dreamer's life and psychological situation, I suppose. So let's take a look at that, and you can try and interpret the dream along with me. The other thing you could practice doing, as I want to make this series not so much about the interpretation, but the process of it. So how do you go about interpreting dreams? Using some of the rules, some fundamental guidelines that Jung has developed and offered us in order for us to understand the language of dreams. It's really a language. It's like Chinese. It's like symbols. And we have to understand that symbol or those symbols to understand the language. And it's very difficult. But once you sort of get the hang of it and develop an intuitive sense about these things, it's not that. It becomes quite, I wouldn't say easy, but it does make a lot of sense. So it's not like a normal language where you have grammar. This has a lot to do with intuition and feeling, because logic is thrown out the window. Grammar is effectively logic, and you could equate it to like programming. You need logic in order to create a program. But with dreams, because it comes from a subjective source, because it is subjective, and it ultimately makes it inherently irrational. So we rely on feelings and intuition. And you'll develop these things as we go on. All right, so for context, this dream came from several years ago, as a matter of fact. And at the time, this dreamer was struggling immensely with identity. The dreamer was also an atheist at the time, mainly due to his personality type as well, in which case he is an INTP personality type. That's very important for you to understand the personality type of the individual, because it will explain where the compensation will lie in terms of the dream. Dreams act as a compensatory mechanism for our conscious attitude. So if you understand that law, dream interpretation becomes a whole lot more sensical. It makes a lot more sense when you apply that law. Yes, so this dreamer is an INTP and was an atheist at the time, believing mostly in rational things in science. He did not have a significant understanding of feelings because he was a thinker, as an INTP is. They dominate with introverted thinking, so that's very important too. He was going through an extremely rough time. He was also 32 years old at the time of this dream, which is another powerful biological indicator of the process of transformation that is going on in the psychology of this individual. Jesus was 32, remember? So age does play an important role in determining the psychological state of the individual. 25 or 26 is usually when we stop developing biologically our brains. It stops growing biologically. It doesn't mean we stop learning at all or developing in terms of psychological processes, but it means in a biological sense the brain stops developing. So that is also an important thing to note, because it will reflect in the individual's dreams that they may be going through some biological changes. In essence, that does cause some psychological changes as well, and they might not understand it, but if you understand it from a biological point of view, it can explain that some of the things you're experiencing psychologically may be attributed to the biological changes you're experiencing, similar to puberty or menopause when we hit that age. Equally, midlife, a very important age. These are really important rules you need to understand if you're going to practice analytical psychology or dream interpretation for that matter. All of these little nuances about the human are essential. In addition to these general rules there is the nuance of the individual and their associations, their history, their trauma, their childhood, their relationship to the parents. All of these play an enormous role in the analysis of the psychology of the individual. So yes, this dreamer was going through significant changes at 32, not really understanding where he should go in life as well. I think a lot of people struggle with this identity crisis. They sort of don't know what the hell they want to do with their life. This dreamer was going through that too. A severe crisis externally was going on. This individual, I will not give you the full details of this individual's life, but I can tell you that he was going through a severe crisis externally. His world was completely turned upside down. He is a good individual. He's a good-hearted individual, but some things in the external world were just messed up, and he tripped effectively, and then he had this dream. So that's a little bit of context. I've given you his personality type, his age, his conscious situation at the time of the dream. Now we can take a look at the dream itself. I'm not reading it off of a script. I'm just gonna play it back through memories. It's a short dream. So the dream goes as follows. The dreamer is in a white expanse. Everything is just white, sort of like the archetypal image of heaven, if you would like. Everything is just white. There's also that scene in Harry Potter when Dumbledore dies. I think it's the very last scene at the train station. Beautiful metaphor, by the way, where he meets Dumbledore and it's all white and Voldemort is there in his like fetus form. It was similar to that. So if you watched Harry Potter, that's what it looks like. So all white, and the dreamer sees in the middle of this expanse, this white expanse, a young woman sitting crossed-legged on the floor wearing a blue veil. Very powerful image here. In her arms, she was holding a baby, and behind her was a golden aura glowing, emanating from her. And the dreamer was standing on her right, so this woman was sitting on his left. And he felt a wave of warmth pour over him, and the dream ended. And the dreamer woke up. Very powerful image. I want to reiterate, I did not mention it directly, but as I mentioned, I actually did mention this. The dreamer's atheist, and was an atheist, so that's very important. So the image you can pull off of that, we all know what this image represents, especially if you're a Christian or Catholic, or if you're religious. You understand who this woman is. It's the Virgin Mary. The blue veil holding the baby, the gold light emanating from behind her. That's the Virgin Mary. The dreamer knew this instinctively. He didn't need to say it. He described the dream poetically without even having to mention the word Virgin Mary. I understood it immediately that was the Virgin Mary. Very powerful imagery. Let's analyze it. I don't really think we need to interpret it that much, but what we're trying to do here with this analysis thing, again, is we're not trying to understand it. We're trying to just experience it. And that's what I mentioned in the previous video about dream analysis or analytical psychology. The difficulty is not in like the mathematical formulas or the theories or memorizing these things. No, it's rather putting yourself in the shoes of the individual. So just imagine if you yourself were in that dream and experience it. And in doing so, you will understand the dream. Can you imagine just standing there and you see this very powerful image, especially if you're a non-believer, if you're an atheist, and you see this image? I mean, the first thing I would ask is, why the hell am I dreaming about the Virgin Mary when I'm not when I'm not religious? So you could associate that with his external lack of belief coincided or is directly related to his external situation, meaning that sense of meaninglessness was his lack of connection to the spiritual realm, if you would like to put it at that. And that's exactly what the dream is showing. His conscious attitude lacked any spiritual connection. This dreamer did not believe in that stuff. So in return, in exchange, again, here we're going to apply the law of compensation, offered him a compensatory image, a delivering of a message from somewhere greater, that No, actually, it is true. She is real. Not real in the sense of our material reality, but real in the sense of your own spiritual or psychological reality. She is real. She is here. You felt her. You felt her warmth. And that also explains another compensatory image. The warmth must be explained as in conscious reality, he must have been feeling completely numb, completely empty, completely cold. And so the dream offers him a compensation to effectively reassure him that he's not alone. And the most powerful image here is actually not so much, it is the Virgin Mary, but who she is carrying in her arms. It's the Christ child. It's Jesus. You don't have to believe me in any of this stuff. It's just what was interpreted. The image is clear, and the streamer did have this dream. I like to, people who are doubters, effectively, they say like, they don't believe in God, because he's like, you know what I'm talking about. And for the longest time, the streamer also said those things, like he didn't believe in God and blah, blah, blah. But I asked him a simple question. I said, when you had this dream, you had it. Now try and prove it to me that you had this dream. You can't prove it. You cannot prove it. You can say that you had this dream, but there's no way you can prove it to me. Such is the experience of God. You cannot prove it to anyone. It is a very personal and lonely experience, and very powerful experience that you cannot explain to anybody else. So what that effectively means is God is not out there. It's inside you, just like in dreams. You cannot share, you cannot tell anyone of this experience and prove to anyone that it is real, but it is real for the dreamer. So effectively, what this dream proved to the dreamer, and this clicked, was that she is real, he is real, God is effectively real in him, or as the dream indicated in a beautiful picture, that the Christ child is born. God effectively is born in his psychology from this dream. After having suffered such a severe crisis externally, the dream came down, swooped down from the heavens, and effectively saved this man's life, giving him the image of divine guidance, of divine inspiration, support, his anima, as I mentioned in many videos about the anima, the connection to the self being the meaning, or God representing the metaphorical representation of meaning, or rather the personification of meaning. So that's what this dream offered this individual. And you could say that this individual is no longer an atheist. He may not believe in like a religious practice, but he does now understand that it exists. It is something unexplainable, something much greater, and it's having that greater understanding, that understanding that something greater is there, that gives you that support. It's like exactly in the image, being cradled. It's almost as if you've received divine embrace, that you're not falling through the abyss anymore. Now, this dream is so powerful that just as Jesus was 32, it transformed his psychology completely and his outer life. Because what happens when you have that kind of support? It's not that you no longer have fear, but you have courage now to face life. You have this underlying purpose, meaning. You can reconnect with people. You can understand what your aspirations, your ambitions, your goals, your purpose is, where it lies, and what you need to do to pursue those things now. And it gives you that foundational support, that meaning. The glitter in the eyes comes back. The individual now knows that he can approach life with meaning. This dream offered that to him because he went through that severe crisis. There's a very famous quote in the Bible by Jesus. Again, I'm not sure if it's true or not, but Jesus effectively says, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a wealthy man to enter the kingdom of heaven. To summarize, what that effectively means is that people who never struggle in life, who never have any of these challenges, these crises, will never experience the kingdom of heaven as this individual who suffered that crisis did. It comes through a compensation. This is what Jung discovered. He's just incredibly powerful as a psychologist. It's not to say that, okay, now I will intentionally put myself in a crisis. What he effectively suggested with the law of compensation was that in times of severe crisis, you will be reminded that something greater than you exists out there, and you will experience it only if you have suffered to that extent. There will be a saving factor. How is this related to psychology, or how is this related to dream interpretation or anything like that? What I mentioned again, you applied the law of compensation, so that helps you understand, okay, the dream is compensating for his external attitude. Now, if I offered this interpretation to the individual, if the individual had this dream, which he didn't really need interpreting, by the way, he could understand this dream, and now he has that fortification. But since we did interpret it, and now he understands it, he brought it into conscious meaning, and now he's able to approach life completely different from what he was before. To a large extent, the rational thinking mode of living no longer is sufficient to live life properly. You have to balance it, again, with his personality type, the extroverted feeling, the feeling function, the eros principle, the love principle needs to coexist alongside with the thinking aspect. That yes, you have very powerful thinking, you built a lot of things, you've made a lot of money because of thinking, but it's not enough. There's no meaning in that. Meaning is derived from this other principle, the eros function. So the dream, quite literally, to rebalance that rational mindset, offered him the eros principle, the Virgin Mary, his anima, his soul, effectively. His soul and the self, Jesus being the archetypal image of the self, the God image. So this individual quite literally saw God in his dreams. But again, as beautiful as this dream is, it comes at a huge cost because of what he was experiencing externally. And in terms of dream analysis, that's really where the power lies, in that human-to-human connection of empathy. Now I, as the analyst, understand what this dreamer was going through. I could empathize with him. And one quote that Jung mentioned was that one of the tragic things in our times is that people aren't able to tell their stories. This individual, and as the power of the analyst, is that you get to listen to these people's stories and understand what exactly they were going through from a psychological perspective. The empathy, that connection that you build with that person, that warmth that is exchanged between two human beings is transferred. That is the power of analytical psychology. It is not about theory. It is not about using AI to interpret dreams. The AI cannot provide you with that warmth, that physical warmth, that physical connection, that unexplainable psychological telepathy that we all have between each other. And that's what I explained to this dreamer, because obviously as a thinking type, he would use AI to try to interpret dreams. And it worked for probably like a few days, but then it started breaking down because, the associations just didn't line up with the interpretation. Like, he had so many personal associations, so much history behind himself, that you can't feed that all to the AI, including the intuition. How do you feed it that? How do you feed what a mother means to you? How do you feed it what your relationship is with your father on a very deeply personal feeling level? How do you feed it shame? How do you feed it love? How do you explain love? You can't. So that's what the AI cannot cross. It cannot cross that boundary because it's just ones and zeros. It can help to a certain extent in terms of rational thinking, but once again, the rational aspect is no longer sufficient in living a good life. What it effectively explained too is that in an archetypal sense, our collective psychology, the collective unconscious, is transforming. There's a rebalancing act going on, which explains a lot of the problems that are going on in the world, not just in terms of the individual psyche, but in terms of relationships, in terms of war, that there is a outcry from our unconscious. It's rebalancing, that we have gone too far rational. Like we call that rationality, the patriarchal thing, so that the whole feminine is in revolt, is in rebellion now. And I, as an analyst, have had many visions and dreams of this feminine principle coming back to rebalance this imbalance. And that's exactly what is happening. The woman is in revolt, and you can see this in relationships, you can see this in marriages, you can see this in partnerships. The inner woman, her masculinity is simply because the feminine feels so unsafe that her inner masculine comes out. And especially for this individual and his dream, you could see now very clearly that the masculine aspect cannot sustain itself without the feminine aspect. This individual was on the brink of God knows what, destruction. And without the feminine principle to return him his soul, without that image of the anima returning to him, the masculine is incomplete. It will never attain wholeness. You need the feminine principle to attain wholeness. This is incredibly powerful stuff. Once more, we used the law of compensation to analyze dreams. We now have a depiction of the anima, and we talked about in my other anima videos, like the stages of development for the anima. So you could effectively say that with having had this dream about the Virgin Mary, he has attained a new level of his anima development now, because the Virgin Mary is the third stage of anima development. Sophia would be the last. So he's completely developed from his Helen phase, the aesthetic or sexual, biological sexual drives of the anima, what men usually project onto women and seek out that external beauty in things. So he's elevated to a more spiritual aspect, his connection to the divine wisdom. That's what his anima gives this individual. Now he has unlocked divine wisdom and an understanding of the feminine principle. So now, if he has trouble in his relationships with women in the past, he now understands women to a far greater level than he would have before his anima evolved effectively, like a Pokemon. So what that ultimately means too is that he now is able to build more meaningful relationships with the opposite sex, not just with partners, but also with his siblings, if he has a sister, and his mother, and his relationship to his mother. It's just incredibly powerful, guys. So yeah, this is one of those dreams that doesn't happen often. It usually happens once in a lifetime for the individual, because you can't really, you can't have these experiences too much, because you cannot see God like too much. Like, you need to sort of forget that you saw God. That's what Jung put it as. Once you experience God, it can completely destroy the individual. Now, luckily, this individual was going through that severe crisis, so it compensated with a bit like sort of like a managed inflation to give him a bit of a confidence boost, you could say. However, if this thing happens without, like, let's say a vision comes and this thing happens, this kind of image happens to an individual without that crisis, what normally happens is that individual goes through a massive inflation. And you can see this very clearly with a lot of these hyper-masculine men on social media. They've just gone through this massive inflation. They've short-circuited that experience because they did not suffer prior to that. And what effectively happens, and you can see it, you feel this sort of irritation whenever someone's inflated, when someone's too egotistical, too prideful. They are associating, or they effectively see themselves as God. And you will see that in a lot of these men on social media. They effectively think they are the chosen ones. That's a very early indicator of a neurosis developing or a psychosis developing. If the individual goes through that inflation and does not come down, they will go through a psychosis. They will quite literally think themselves as Jesus Christ. Now, that individual that I'm speaking of this dream, he could have easily have said that Christ child, like, instead of saying that Christ child was born in me and, separating himself from the archetypal image, he could have easily said, I dreamt of that image, and therefore that is me, and therefore I am Jesus Christ. And then he goes through this massive inflation. He starts telling everyone, I'm Jesus fucking Christ, like, worship me, which some of these guys are doing on social media, by the way. But that's exactly it. So he didn't identify with it. The ego did not identify with God. Because what happens if you identify with God? God will swallow you whole and you will be destroyed. You will go insane, effectively. A lot of artists, this happens to a lot of artists in the past. A lot of artists go to asylums. This happened to Nietzsche. He identified with that experience. When he went very deep into his psychology, he identified with that experience and effectively was destroyed by it. He went insane. He went to an asylum and he could not ever break out of that insane mode of existence anymore. That's what happens. So, very powerful stuff. Powerful in the aspect that it's dangerous too. So you must be very careful about these things too. And this is the power of dreams. It has the power to transform, create, or destroy. And we have to approach these things very thoughtfully with a lot of empathy as well. And it's my job as the analyst to make sure that this individual does not, destroy themselves through inflation. So I have to make sure that I deliver the message properly. And this is the power of the analyst and the power of analyzing dreams. So that's all I have for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it. I would definitely like to hear your thoughts, if you have any, in the comments. And if you have any questions about your own dreams, please don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to work with you on your dreams. If you have a dream that you're just desperately wanting to understand, or desperately don't understand it and want to understand it, we can take a look and work on it together. You could email me directly or go on my website and share your dream publicly. Or I developed an app as well to help you learn how to interpret your own dreams. It's like a book, effectively, a smart book, where I get to constantly update the information. It's everything to do with analytical psychology, Jung's psychology. Not only does it teach you how to interpret dreams, but it also gives you insight into typology, which is, like I mentioned in the beginning, very important in understanding the individual. Cognitive functions. It gives you a whole dictionary of symbols that are interpreted in a general sense, so archetypally. And it also gives you insight into the model of the psyche and how we go about, understanding each layer of the psyche in order to get to a lower level, ultimately towards individuation or the self. So it's all there. It's on my app. You can check that out if you're interested. And I hope you have a wonderful day.